Okay. So we're gonna go back into our project from last week. So I'm logged into Scratch. I'm gonna go to my stuff, and I'm gonna go to movement example. And let's go straight to see inside. And so you don't have to do this, but I usually like to make a new copy of a project as I add new features, so I can go back to previous examples. So I'm gonna save this as a copy, and I'll just name this Sprite movement, and what we're gonna add later, which is sound. And so I'm not gonna review everything. I'm gonna leave the player alone, but I'm gonna review the sprite movement, and also gonna go into a new concept, which is these blocks. This is another way to kind of organize our code into little chunks, and it's gonna be useful going forward with organizing stuff for our sprites and other things as they get more complex. So it's pretty simple, but I'll go over the basics of that. So let's grab our sprites. I'm just gonna get rid of everything in here and start from scratch. See, I'm trying out some different concepts. Oops. Okay. So we've got our sprite, and most of you guys have put in most of this stuff, but just to review a little bit, we're gonna add the animation back in, and we're gonna add the movement, and then we're gonna cover a new concept, which is the block. So we'll organize our code a little bit that way. So we've got our sprite here, and so one thing that I want to do to make the game a little bit more challenging is add copies of the sprite. So we talked about that a little bit last time. We're going to review that a little bit. So I want to add a couple copies of the sprite. I want to make the sprite move. I'm going to go from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen. Some of you guys have implemented different movement approaches, which is good. They'll be kind of similar, but if you want to make changes to it, that's cool. It's good to experiment with that. So we're gonna make copies of the sprite, move it from the top of the screen to the bottom. Hey, Mir. And we're gonna make it animate, and we're gonna reset it if it hits the bottom of the screen. And later, when we add sound, we'll also look at how to make it interact with the main player character. So starting with events, we're gonna need at least one of these green flag guys. We might need a few of those. So we'll get one of those. And then we're gonna want to make a copy. So we can create a clone using this create a clone of myself. And then we're gonna wanna use when I start as a clone. And so that way, when a clone is created, it will know what to do, not just when we click the green flag. And so if we click the green flag now, we should see a clone, although it's going to be in the same position. So if I grab that bird, you can see there are two birds. So the first thing we want to do is set the position. I covered this last time, so I'm just going to go through it quickly. But this is where using a block will come in handy. So I talked about using blocks to organize the code. We also looked at broadcasting messages. This is kind of like a different way to do that. Although they have very different basic rules. But to spawn, we want to spawn both the original and the clone into a random position. So I'm going to make a block for that. And I'm just going to call this bird spawn. And so when you create a block, this is basically making a reusable bit of blocks of code. And we just give it a name that kind of tells us what it's going to do. This is sort of like creating a comment. When we give it a name, it should describe what the block is for. And we don't want it to be super long, but just something descriptive. So in my little bird spawn block, I just want to do kind of what we did last time, where I'm going to go to a random position. And then I'm going to set the Y to something specific at the top of the screen. So I'll go to set Y, and I forget what I used for this. I think it was like negative 180 maybe. See what that looks like. So when I create a block, I can define the block, and I just do that once. And now I have this block called bird spawn, which I can pull and, you know, drag onto, you know, either one of these blocks here. Oh, I went the wrong direction. Let's go to 180. And actually, I think it was 160. So now if I hit my little green flag, I'm going to spawn 2 birds. And I can change this if I want, you know, more birds. I can create multiple clones. If I want, instead of, you know, doing 2, then I could use a repeat. So I'll put in a repeat here instead. And I'll just repeat this twice. Okay, so now if I run the game, I get 3 birds. 1 is the original and 2 are clones. So this is a slightly different approach, but we have the same basic setup. And now we're using these blocks, which make it a little bit easier to repeat. When we start as a clone, we spawn at the top of the screen. And when we, you know, our original is also going to spawn at the top of the screen. So these blocks are really useful whenever you have stuff that you want to do for multiple sprites, or if you have multiple events that happen in different cases. Okay. There's also, you know, as I've probably said a bunch of times before, this isn't the only way to do this. This is just one way to approach it. There's going to be lots of different variations for how you want to set this up. Okay, so we've got our bird creation. Let's get our animation going, and we'll get our movement going. So once we spawn the bird, we also want to start the animation. And we can either, you know, start a new block for this, or we can put it into the same block. I like to keep things nice and organized, so, you know, different blocks are handling different components. So I'm going to make for a block for this, and I'm going to call this bird animation. And I'm going to define that over here. And this is going to be pretty similar to our player animation. So I'm going to go to looks. I'm going to go to, well, actually, let's start with a weight block. We're going to want a couple of weight blocks. So we'll probably want a couple of these. We're also going to want a forever block. That's where I should really start, because we want the animation to be going all the time. And we're going to want to wait. Let's actually delete one of these. And we're not going to wait very long, just 0.1 seconds. I'll duplicate that. And then we'll change the sprite. So we're going to switch costume to flying 2, and then switch it back to flying 1. Okay, so now we should get a few birds, and they should be animating. Although we have to remember to actually call this block. So let's go back to our animation block, and here's like where it starts to be like, oh, should I add this to spawn, or is it part of the, you know, when it started? I'm gonna add it up here. I may move this around later, but this should be fine. Okay, so now we've got our birds animating. We could also wait to create a clone. Maybe it'd be nice to have a little wait in between these clones. So notice one thing that happens here when I do this. Notice the first bird doesn't start to animate because this whole block gets paused by that wait section. So now what I would want to do is put this at the top before we spawn our other birds. Oh, but now we're getting stuck. Oh, we're getting stuck here actually because we're going to this bird animation, but this goes forever, so we never get here. So that's another thing to watch out for if you have a forever block like this. So the easiest thing to do here is just grab another one of these guys, and we'll just handle our spawn separately from or we'll handle cloning our sprite separately from the original sprite. Okay, so now we create our 3 birds and we start the animation. So now let's start the movement. So we'll make another block. We'll call this bird movement and add this in here. And one thing to point out with these blocks, I'm adding bird to the beginning just so it's really clear what it's for. But you could just say animation, movement, spawn, because these blocks are only part of this sprite. If I go back to my player sprite, those blocks are not part of the player sprite. So when I define blocks, they're defined within the sprite that I'm editing by default. Okay. So I've got my animation, I've got my spawn, and now let's add the movement. So I've seen you guys have some different movements. That's cool. I'm just going to do a very simple one. I'm going to go to forever, and I'm going to move the y. So I'm going to say change y by 10, and then I think I need to say -10. And so now I need to call this block. So I need to make a little space up here. So let's start the movement. Okay, for some reason I'm not getting, let's try changing this to 10 and see if that works. No. Okay, so let's see. We might be getting stuck with our animation. Okay, we might have to rethink how these guys are connected. Okay. Okay, 10 might be too fast. All right, let's put this back in here and do -10. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, let's do -5. That's pretty good. Okay. So then they're not animating because these 2 forever blocks are kind of blocking each other. So how can we deal with that? I guess we can change forever to something else. Let's change it to, we can actually add our movement here. Let's use one of our if statements. So let's go to control and say if, or let's use an if else. Again, there's not one way to do this. There's lots of different ways to do it, so you may have other approaches. So let's say if we're hitting the edge, we're going to reset, else we're going to change by y. That might solve our problem. So let's move we're still getting blocked by okay, let's take out animation for a second and just make sure our movement works. Okay, so if we're touching the edge, we're not touching the edge, unless we are. Let's see if we change this. Okay, let's see. Okay, we might need to combine these for now. Let's see. Or let's just, okay, we'll just have to add more setup. So let's go back to what we had. Let's leave this forever here. Let's leave this motion. And I'll just add another one of these guys. And start the movement. Add another one of these guys. There's probably a better way to do this. I might optimize this a little bit later, but for now... Oh, actually, we need to do this. We'll start the animation like that. Okay, there we go. So now we've got our animation and our movement. So we're handling those with separate events. There's probably a better way to do that, but we'll figure it out later. Okay, so then the last thing we need to do is just reset the bird when we hit the bottom. So we'll put this inside our bird movement, and we'll get an if. So we'll say if, and then we need to sense if we're touching the edge. And if we're touching the edge, we are just gonna spawn the bird. So we just take my bird spawn. So this is another thing that's useful with these blocks, is that we can call this bit of code from multiple different events. So we can start it when we click the button or the green flag. We can start it as a clone, but we can also use it to reset when the bird is going to spawn. We might want to use a wait here, so we could wait before we reset, and then we could hide the bird if we want, so we don't see it. So we could hide it and then wait and then spawn, but of course we need to show it. So let's just add that to our spawn block, so that will make sure that when the bird gets reset, we'll see it again. Seems like the birds are moving at different speeds, which is kind of interesting, because I have the same Y value. I'll have to do some research and see why that might be happening. Unless I called movement twice. Yeah, I'll have to look into that a little bit more. I'm not sure. It does seem like one of them is twice as fast as the other two. So I'm probably doing movement twice somewhere. But let's see. Okay, I'm just doing the animation there. Bird movement. Change. Huh. Yeah, that is weird. I don't know why. Let's see. Let's see if the animation is different too. Okay, for some reason, yeah, the original bird is moving twice as fast. I'll have to do a little debugging and figure that out, but I'll work on that, and we can go over that later. But I think this is good for now. Again, this is just one approach. This is just one way of doing it. You might find other approaches that you prefer, and you might have slightly different movement. But I'm going to leave this like this for now. We're going to add a couple more things later in class, and we'll go over that. But for now, any questions on creating a block or any of the other stuff that we've added? Everybody's good? Cool. All right, so we'll stop here.